down here.
Yeah.
Alright. I'm just getting things set up for presenters today.
Keith, it's good to see you here today. Remind me of Cleve Wilkie and the boys at Mills Home, what he used to say about you. You were reared there or rear-ended there. So I guess you can tell us more about that later, but it's good to have you today. Jim Doherty, a giant that we stand on his shoulders here today, always told me, he said, Sam, you need to have a program from Mills Home or Baptist Children's Homes every year. So I always appreciate that. So I'm still listening to Jim, and he's one of those giants that we stand on his shoulders. And speaking of that, a little giant in our club is Kim Cecil. She inspired this program. If we had credits, she'd be the executive producer of it today. But a couple of years ago now, because of COVID, she was challenged about doing a program on past district governor, our first past district governor, I.G. Greer. So she called me, and then I said, well, I know who to call. I'm going to call on Jim Edmondson, and he'll be our man that can help us with this. So we stand on a lot of shoulders since February 27th in our Rotary Club back in 1922. And one of those was as I.G. Greer, who, as I said, was our first district governor. He had a major impact at Baptist Children's Homes in the 30s and 40s, and Jim will be sharing this with you. A lot of buildings across North Carolina, and particularly on Mills Home, are named after him. Jim, our speaker today, has been a good friend of mine. I knew him before he came because he was in Louisiana working at the children's homes or thereabouts, and his wife, so I knew their reputation before they came to work with us in the year 2000. Jim's an author, a speaker. He's a graduate of LSU and Fine Arts, and that helps him bring this program today, I think. And he's been serving Baptists in North Carolina for over 30 years, so welcome, Jim. Come and lay it on us.
What a pleasure to be with you today. Kim put the pressure on me. She said, you've had 2 years to prepare, so make it count. Now that's kind of tough, because I told her I've only started, really seriously putting things together a month ago. But nevertheless, I'm thrilled to be here with you today. Great to be a part of Baptist Children's Homes of North Carolina. We are very much a part of Thomasville. Sam Barefoot's a great representative of Baptist Children's Homes in this community, serving on boards and knowing many of you personally. I know some of you personally, and it's good to be with you today to share with you what some people may not know much about. How many of you heard of I.G. Greer before? Yeah, he's very noteworthy. But ideally, in our nation, he's a treasure, but not a very well-known treasure of our country. And so I've got some prepared statement that I'm going to go from in a minute, but I just wanted to take a few minutes and just introduce myself. Sam mentioned that I lived in Louisiana. My dad was military, and we traveled lots of places, but we settled back in central Louisiana where he was from. If you've ever been to Louisiana, you can't get there from anywhere there. I mean, once you live in a particular area, it takes a long time to get to the North Louisiana. It takes a long time to get to South Louisiana. I was lucky enough to meet my wife in Louisiana. Her maiden name is Johnson. And so you know right from the get-go that I eat very well at my house. My wife's Cajun, and she's a beautiful lady. We've been married 40 years as well, and born in 1961. So have some connection there as well. Now, I was interested, you listened and you saw your announcements. Tell me again, which one of you can tell me what I.G. Greer did that was noteworthy for this Rotary Club? Shoot a hand up. What was he? Not you. Did you know?
District governor.
District governor. He was the first district governor. We produced a new history book at Baptist Children's Homes. Dr. Blackwell, who's quite a historian, he's the president of Baptist Children's Homes, and he's produced this new book, and I want you to have this. So Sam, if you'll pass it that way. I've got one more book, so I hope that you'll listen closely, because I'm going to ask a question somewhere along the way, and I'll be glad to give you a book. If somebody really wants another book, I have a box of them in the car. I.G. Greer, in terms of Baptist Children's Homes, is highly, highly significant. In terms of what he was to North Carolina, was phenomenal. have a slide up, and these are some of the pictures, and we'll make reference to them in a minute. But I.G. Greer did something very unique that made him a national treasure. And before I begin my prepared statement, I want to play for you a couple of songs. What he did is he was from Watauga County, and when he was at Appalachian State, which was not Appalachian State at that time, he would go up in the mountains in Will County, Ashe County, Watauga County, and he would hear of somebody who sang old mountain folk songs. And he would hear that Joe, Papa Joe, up in the mountain along so-and-so cove, and he'd go up to their house and he'd knock on their door and he'd introduce himself. And he says, I hear you know some mountain folk songs. And they said, yeah. And he said, will you perform them for me? And he and his wife would sit down with notepads and transcribe every word. And you might think that's kind of strange, but we're proud in North Carolina of the tradition that we have in our mountain folks. One of the great things that we know that we can enjoy is their contribution to what we call mountain music, folk music, which has become very much a part of what bluegrass music is even today. So he would go out, and then what he would do is he would actually learn the songs. Now, he was a true, he was very exact, he believed in education, and so what he did is he said, I'm going to be as true to the reproduction of these songs as possible. So it may not sound pretty, but I want you to hear a couple of songs that he's performing in. The first one was with his wife, who's on dulcimer.
He urges me to wed to him, but I hardly think I will. Poor Bill, poor silly Bill, he urges me to wed to him, but I hardly think I will. He whispers of devotion, devotion pure and deep, but downside is still with a home. Now he thinks it would be pleasant to journey down the hill, go hand in hand together, but I hardly think I will. Poor Bill, poor silly Bill, he urges me to wed to him, but I hardly think I will. He came last night to see me and made so long a stay. I began to think of love's head would never go away. And first learned to hate him, and I won't hate him still. He urges me to wed him, but I hardly think I will. Poor Bill, poor silly Bill, he urges me to wed him, but I hardly think I will. I'm sure I would not choose him if it were in my power. But he said if I refused him, he could not hear from now. Now you know the Bible teaches that it's very wrong to kill. So talk the matter over and settle Mary Bill.
There are currently about
Little known fact is that Bruce Springsteen was a great influence.
I.G. Greer was featured on the bass. What's significant about this is we're so commonly accept the fact that there are recordings, that there's music and things like this. No way, other than people teaching other people about mountain music. And so sometimes when they would go out and actually do these transcriptions, they would go to another house in another area of the mountains, and somebody would have the same song, but it'd be a different variation. So some songs have 8 to 10 variations to a particular song. I.G. Greer is a true son of North Carolina and a little-known national treasure, Issac Garfield Greer. He was named for the 20th President of the United States, James A. Garfield. His parents must have been some way trying to honor Garfield because he was assassinated the same year in which I.G. or I. Greer was born. He was born December 5th, 1881 in the Zionville community of Watauga County. If you've ever been up that way and you're driving up the highway north of Boone, it suddenly seems like the mountains just rise up because the highway goes right into them. And I found this. It says Watauga County, where the mountains reach up to heaven and the autumn colors float to earth. I.G. Was the son of Philip and Mary Greer. Had the opportunity to talk to Keith, and he was telling me about his father, who I have a story of in just a minute, but he was known to be quite a disciplinarian, and his brothers and various things. I'm looking forward to visiting with Keith some more about it later. I.G. was raised on a family farm where he worked with his parents and his sisters and his brother. I think there were how many sisters, Keith?
Two.
2 sisters and 5 brothers?
Yes.
5 brothers, so it's a large family, which is very typical of families that lived in the mountains. They tended cattle, sheep, and hogs. They grew produce and grain crops. I.G. began his education, and what's significant about this, because he came from a small community in the mountains, but he began his education in elementary school in Zionville, but later attended school in Boone. And Keith, tell me what school that was. Do you remember?
Appalachian Academy.
The Appalachian Academy, which was only founded maybe 5 or 6 years before that. Is that something like that?
Yes.
He got a great high school education there, and we know that because he was accepted at UNC Chapel Hill. So he went from Zionville to Chapel Hill, education primarily by waiting on tables in restaurants and doing odd jobs. If you see the picture at the very bottom, that's the young I.G. Greer. That would be probably around his college days. Graduating from UNC in 1908, he returned to the mountains, and he became the teacher in the community of a one-teacher schoolhouse. And he loved it. He taught there from 1908 to 1910, and his love for teaching, he became quite noted for his abilities, and his family was well known. He went to teach at Appalachian State Teachers College. How many App folks are in here? ASU, Appalachian State. This Appalachian State Teachers College was the precursor for App State, where he served as history and government professor from 1910 to 1932. He later devoted a season to graduate school at Columbia University, and in 1942, Wake Forest University conferred upon Greer an honorary Doctor of Laws degree. When he began teaching in the county, he was boarded. He was going to live with someone, and he was boarded by a very well-off farmer and his wife. And the story goes that they gave him a room on the 2nd floor. I.G. began to unpack his suitcase, and as he was putting his clothes in the dresser, he got to the 3rd dresser, and stacked very neatly in the bottom drawer was a stack of cash. And so he was quite surprised, and he came down and he explained to the housewife, I found all this money in your bottom drawer. And she said, yes, that's our life savings. And we never put any money in the bank, but when we get a little extra, we always put it in the drawer. Well, I.G. replied, he said, but I'm a stranger to you. Surely you'll not trust a stranger to live in the room with all your savings. And she looked him squarely in the eyes and said, I know your parents, and I know our school committee. They would never put anyone in charge of the school unless they knew he was honest. If you can be trusted with the children of this community, certainly you can be trusted with our money. Later, while teaching at the college, which became Appalachian State, the respected Greer represented his county in the state assembly, the General Assembly, in 1926. A young man. He probably was just about 30 years old at that time. He also, in the Boone area, served on the Boone Board of Aldermen. The students from ASU's class of 1916 established the I.G. Greer Distinguished Professorship Fund in 1966 as a memorial, and this is what they said, to our teacher, counselor, and friend. The university named I.G. Greer Hall, the I.G. Greer Auditorium, and the I.G. Greer Studio Theater in his honor. Greer was a recognized authority on folk music and one of the earliest collectors of Northwestern North Carolina folk songs. In working on this, I've actually had the opportunity one time to meet David Holt. Many of you may be familiar with David Holt. He's a performer of Appalachian music, he's a historian of music, and I'm really working to get an interview with him because I'd love to hear what he has to say about the contribution that I.G. Greer has had, especially to like bluegrass music, or even today there's a resurgence among young people to do mountain music again. The text that was primarily acquired during his going out doors came from Ashland and in addition to avidly collecting the regional folk songs, Greer frequently performed, as you heard from the MP3 file, but not just in North Carolina, but also throughout the United States and in fact some European countries. This interest and notoriety calls for him to have a commercial recording with Paramount label, so they actually did a record of some of his music. Several recordings are in the archive of American folk songs by the Library of Congress Division of Music. His vocal renditions were often accompanied by his dulcimer playing wife, and this is Willie Spanhauer, and that's her dulcimer that you see in the picture. She was from Morganton. The couple married in 1916, and they had 2 sons, Isaac Garfield Jr., who had a prominent career in the United States Air Force, and Joseph Phillip, who served as an administrator at Children's Hospital in Chicago. Both of the sons came back and settled in this area of the Triad. In fact, I was able to come up with a picture for Jr., who passed away in Greensboro. Through this persistent scholarly music, Greer emerged as one of the first nationally recognized authorities on mountain folk music. And once again, understand what that means. That's monumental. And not just in the state of North Carolina, but in the world. And there were people who had come and moved to North Carolina from Scotland and Ireland and other parts of Europe, and they had settled and ended up in the mountains. And they brought these traditions of making music. And the music were basically stories. If you listen to the song closely that I played earlier, that was a story about one man and how he lived his life. And so a lot of times the stories that you're most familiar with about music are stories about people. Interestingly enough, some of them have even made it into contemporary music. Often musicians will go back and listen to these tapes or listen to these lyrics and create new songs that are relevant to the times today. A collection consisting of his written and recorded ballads are reposited at the ASU Belk Library. I mentioned earlier there's like 600 documents in which he had actually gone out and transcribed. The contribution to American music is substantial. Greer also, because of his involvement with folk music, he served 17 years as the president of the Southern Appalachian Historical Association. If you've ever been to the Boone area and saw Horn in the West, he was one of the people that helped found and create that program. He was president also of the North Carolina Folklore Society. Greer was as noted as his speaking as he was for his performance for folk songs and ballads. And he was very popular, one of the most popular speakers of his generation. He never made a speech without spending long hours in preparation. It's said he would tell this story. And Keith knew this story. We were talking about it, and both of us smiled because it shows a little bit of the character of his dad. Isaac, he tells this story. My father and the Greer boys were working in the cornfield one hot summer day. Father said, "Ike, you go to the house and bring a bucket of cold water." I had to pass by the barnyard, and when I did, I heard the sheep up high on the mountain. I cupped my hands, put them around my mouth, and called as loud as I could for the sheep to come. I heard the old bellwether start down and was elated. I knew all the others would follow. After fetching the water, I returned to the field. Father said, "Ike, I thought I heard you calling the sheep." He said, "Oh yes," I replied. "And they came, every one of them." He was so proud. "Did you feed them?" Father asked. "No, I had no feed for them." Ike says, "My father took me out into some woodlands nearby." Now, if you understand that, folks, you know what's about to happen. And when he had finished his punishment, he brought me back and said, I never call them unless I have something to feed them." Thereafter, Greer insisted that no minister or public speaker had any right to call a group or people together until he was ready to feed them. An active churchman, a deacon, a director of choir, and a teacher of the Bible, Greer was prominent in Baptist life, serving as moderator of the Three Forks Baptist Association. And in 1943, for those that may be Baptist here in the room, he was served as the president of the Baptist State Convention of North Carolina. In 1928, Greer was elected to the Board of Trustees of the Baptist Orphanage, which brings him to Thomasville. 2 years after that, and after the death of M.L. Kessler, if you've ever know some of the history about Thomasville and the Baptist Children's Home, the significant thing about M.L. Kessler is he was actually killed on the train track. It was an accident with an oncoming train. He was coming back from a late speaking engagement at a church. He was tired, he fell asleep, and I don't think he doesn't actually hit the train or something, but he dies of a heart attack. I may have scared him to death. But he died right here on the train track in 1932. And at that time, Greer, who was on the Board of Trustees, was chosen unanimously to become the superintendent. So he leaves Appalachian State. His love for the church, his love for the Lord, his love for Baptist life brings him to Thomasville. Greer came to the orphanage during the depth of the Great Depression. 1932 is when he came. He leaves in 1948. You know what happens during that time period? The end of the Depression and war. So everything that he had to deal with that was major difficulty fell on his shoulders. And the interesting thing is when he came, he knew the state that the orphanage was in. And we're going to talk about that briefly in just a minute. Greer came to the orphanage during the depth of the Depression, and in the early 30s, money was scarce. Then came the World War, and labor and building materials were impossible to secure. Greer aggressively took the reins. In 1931, the orphanage was almost $24,000 in arrears. Now, in that time period, that's a significant amount of money. To me, it's a significant amount of money today. But you can imagine at that time period, it was a huge hole that he was going to have to dig the orphanage out of. And he did. By 1933, Greer led an increasing income, eliminating the deficit. In fact, they had a $12,000, $430 surplus that year. That's a precursor to what some people knew of I.G. Greer, and that was he was a master raiser of money. Those of you who are business people, he could tell a story and people literally would open up their pocketbooks. Other Greer highlights included the addition of the relief and annuity plan for staff members. What does that mean? Retirement. Before that time, there was an aggressive concept, especially during such difficult times, is how can we provide our staff and employees at the orphanage a retirement or money that would help them if they face difficult times. Several years before other Baptist denominational agencies had entered that plan, I.G. Greer had committed to making sure those needs were met. In 1935, Greer implemented financing vocational training through the North Carolina State Department of Education. That meant for the children at Baptist Children's Homes, and at that time you would have been in the hundreds. There probably would have been about 300 children in care. The larger facilities, the buildings, if you've ever driven, if you've not driven on the campus of Mills Home, please come through. The streets are city streets. So y'all won't be interrupting us. Just come through, drive, and take a look at our beautiful campus. But at I.G. Greer's time, they were large 2- and 3-story buildings. And you'd have up to 40 children living in one of those buildings, and easily get close to 300 children there living there at all times. The goal was to make sure those children had a life after they grew beyond the age of being in care. And so this concept of providing vocational training and having the State Department of Education help pay for it was very significant. He also went back to the department and said, we want you to pay for our teachers. Now, that's a pretty big concept because of religion and separation of church and state and so forth. But what his argument was, he said, we are taking these children out of the burden of the school system. At that time, here in Thomasville, we believe the state should help pay the salaries for the teachers. And they agreed with it. His innovations included reducing the number of the children in cottages. I told you they were up to 30 children in each cottage. He began to whittle that down and to become what we call family-style care. And what that means is you have only 10 to 12 children in a building. It's a lot different than having 30. And back when we had 30, we had matrons in care of these children. 7 days a week, they worked 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They were saints. Now, some of the children there thought that they came from another place and not from heaven. Because you can imagine the iron fist that they had to keep everybody moving in the same direction. Interestingly enough, I.G. Greer, knowing that the difficulty that they had, in 1937, he instituted that they have 1 day off a week for these matrons. In 1938, Greer and Hattie Edwards proposed to the trustees that a ministry begin a foster home program. Now, how many of you know about foster care today? Very big. How many of you know people who are foster care parents? Yeah. How many of you have foster care children in your family, or your close friends have foster care children? Certainly, there are people that know all about foster care. It was fledgling at this time, and I.G. Greer was one of the first ones to say, we want to become a part of this program. In fact, what's interesting for us is that a lot of the emphasis we're doing at Baptist Children's Homes is through family foster care. We're going across the state in our 4,200 North Carolina Baptist churches, and we're trying to recruit foster families. DSS and the government of North Carolina, they're excited about what we're doing because we have access to literally millions of Baptist people that may choose to become foster parents. The board unanimously approved the endeavor to enter foster care, the orphanage becoming the first child care agent, one of the first child care agencies in the South to take on such an adventure. Nearly halfway in his tenure, Greer was applauded about the ministry when he was recognized by the Children's Welfare League of America. Now Baptist Children's Homes in Thomasville, North Carolina, was not only doing a great work among Baptists, was not only doing a great work in the state of North Carolina, but was making headways and being noted for the quality service that was being provided through the orphanage, Baptist orphanage at that time. Greer quickly set his leadership course, and this is what he said in 1933, a year into his tenure. He said, the Mills home is not primarily interested in farming, dairying, gardening, sewing, and housekeeping and the like. If you've lived here long enough, you may remember that much of the property at Mills home was agriculture. It was fields. There were cows. We lived in an agrarian society at that time, and much of what was needed to raise and care for those 300 children was provided in a farm setting. He went on to say, these things are only secondary to the real task of fitting boys and girls to become useful Christian citizens of the state. The child is more important than the farm, the house, the school, or any of the church organizations. The child does not exist for these things, but these things exist for the child. The child must not be broken to fit an organization, but the organization must be made to work for the best interest of the child. Again, we always say, that sounds great. That's what we believed in. At that time, it was revolutionary. In fact, what we do today, we do what we call trauma-informed care. And what that means is we accept every child where they are, coming from the experiences that they've had. There's no condemnation, no judgment. Some children come with such a weight on their hearts and their minds over circumstances they had no control over. And they see themselves as what they were before they came. And what we tell them is what they were and who they are is okay. And through that trauma-based informed care, we take children and we try to make a difference in their lives every day through the many facilities that we have throughout the state of North Carolina. The child does not exist for the organization, but the organization exists for the child. On the 50th anniversary of the founding of Mills Home and the Baptist Orphanage, Greer addressed staff members saying this: a general standing on a mountain peak surrounded by his faithful followers said, soldiers, we are standing at the Acropolis. Now we're testing your history here between Greeks and Romans. And he says, behind us are 1,000 military victories and defeats, but yonder lies Rome. Let's march. We at Mills Home are at the close of 50 years of victories and temporary defeats. This year, tomorrow, we celebrate 136 years of ministry. Here, 4,000 children, at that time, 4,000 children have found refuge and a chance to make good. The temptation is to look back and enjoy our victories and just sit still. But yonder is a broken home, a woman and child, victims of circumstances over which they have no control. Shall we respond to their call? Yes. Every impulse says, let's march. We are going. Where are we going? We are going straight to the child. Greer's straight to the child philosophy became the most important legacy of his entire administration. He was a master of raising funds. The numbers speak for itself. In 1932, the endowment was at $492,000, and the working capital was at $16,000 a year. By 1948, at the end of his tenure, the endowment had grown from $492,000 to $2,539,000. The working capital had reached $625,000 from that $16,572. Behind this increase was the ever-growing support of a host of North Carolina Baptists and other friends in the Thomasville community and throughout North Carolina. I'm running over my time. You okay? Because I can wrap it up or I can keep going. I just got a couple more pages. You good? Okay. During his time in Thomasville, Doug Greer was a member of this organization. He became the first district governor. The I.G. Greer Recreation Building on the campus of Mills Home is named after him, and the establishment of the I.G. Greer Society. That means anyone who pledges something to their estate becomes a member of that I.G. Greer Society. After leaving the orphanage, Greer returned to serve as chairman of the board of trustees. He and Wall, what's Wall's first name? Zeno Wall, who was from this community. Well, he wasn't from Thomasville, though, was he? I don't think so. Wahlberg? Yeah. That's right. Thank you. They actually switched places. And Zeno came off the board, he became superintendent, and Greer became a board member. From here, he went to serve as chairman at the board of directors for the North Carolina Baptist Foundation. In 1948 to 1954, Greer served as executive vice president for the North Carolina Business Foundation. His legacy in the state was going to become how he raised money for other organizations. His wife, Willie, died in 1959. He remarried. And on November 24th, in 1967, after a few months of illness with liver disease, Greer slipped into glory, and he was 86 years old. The impact of his courageous and pioneering leadership is felt beyond North Carolina. During his funeral service, which was held November 26th at the University Baptist Church in Chapel Hill, then Baptist Children's Home President W.R. Wagner remembered Greer was never too tired to go the second mile, never too busy to help a person in need, and never ceased to have compassion for others. He said the underprivileged, the neglected, the forgotten were always a priority for Greer. Greer's pastor, Dr. Henry Turlington, praised the well-rounded man in saying this: he was concerned for the child as well as the adults who are no longer children. He was concerned for the poor, but also the wealthy. He was concerned for education, but numbered those with meager education among his closest friends. He loved folk songs, but also football. He loved sociology, psychiatry, and history, but he also loved the simple things of life. He had a story for every occasion, and many were funny. This man, by his own standards, was great, because we are told in the Bible that the one who shall be great among us will be the one who serves us all. I.G. Greer, a native son, a national treasure. He left an immortal heritage in education, history, childcare, music, government, and Christian citizenship. If he were here today, we could say, well done, good and faithful servant. Anybody have any questions? Any comments? Keith, you got anything to say about him? Okay. Thank y'all so much. What instrument did his wife play to accompany him in his music? Wait a minute, who said it first? Here you go.
Well, thanks, Jim.
I think one thing that's interesting is when he was president of this club, before he became the first district governor the Thomasville Club had, he met in this very same building that we're meeting in right now.
Oh, wow.
That's continuity. That's good.
Well, great program. All fun learning about Greer and great history, exciting. Great news to share, everybody.